Greetings, booktubers. Welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to Rocket Summer. This is the Rocket Summer video announcement here. What is Rocket Summer? Rocket Summer is a reading event that was created by Michael K. Vaughan over on his fantastic channel. I will link his announcement video down in the description below where he talks about it and he lists all the co-hosts this year for Rocket Summer. So what is Rocket Summer? In a nutshell, Rocket Summer is reading vintage science fiction from different periods and different decades of time during the month of July. So in the first week of July, you read a vintage science fiction story from anywhere from the very start of science fiction, which is generally considered to be Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, up to anything through the 1930s, and that's week one. Week two, you read something from vintage science fiction from the 1940s. Week three, you read something from the 1950s. And week four, yes, you guessed it, you read a vintage science fiction novel or short story from the 1960s. So from 1960 to 1969. Why do you cut it off at 1970? Because 1970 is generally considered to be the dividing line when New Wave science fiction took over. New Wave science fiction was being written prior to 1970, but that is generally considered the point where the tone of writing really shifts dramatically, where the stories stop focusing on the technology and these pulp action adventure storylines that you get prior to 1970. And 1970 forward, the stories start focusing more on the psychological aspect of the stories, how all this technology and advancements is affecting the individual psyche and humanity in general, what kind of an impact it's having on the people and the persons rather than focusing on the technology. So this is reading vintage science fiction prior to that, where these stories mostly are focusing on those old pulpy style of stories with the technology and the action being forefront and center. So I've got my picks over here for each of the 4 weeks. I'm a slow reader. I can only get through one of these, but I've got a number of them, potential picks picked out for each one of those different weeks. And if there's a book in here that looks very interesting to you for that week, put it down in the comments section below. Say, hey, Grammaticus, on week 2, I think you should read The Weapon Shops of Isher. That one looks really good. Put it down there and I'll take it under advisement and we'll see what we've got. But let's get into it. What are my picks here for Rocket Summer? Rocket Summer week 1, anything from the start of science fiction up through 1939. Pick number 1 is A. Merritt, The Face in the Abyss from 1931. A. Merritt, the very famous author of the science fiction books, Ship of Ishtar, The Moon Pool, probably 2 of his most famous. This is The Face in the Abyss with a fantastic wraparound D&D style cover here by, I think it's Rodney Matthews. Yep, covered by Rodney Matthews. And this is going to be almost certainly a blend of science fiction and fantasy, just like Ship of Ishtar and The Moon Pool. This could be really good. I like A. Merritt a lot. I read and reviewed his story, Ship of Ishtar, here on the channel. That was a very good book. So this could be a really good one. My other choice here for week number 1 is the Amazing Stories Pulp magazine from May of 1935. Yes, this is the actual pulp magazine from May of 1935. It is 90 years old, and it's got a bunch of short stories in here. These were wildly popular back in the 1930s and 1940s. They printed millions of these things, and this one is still here in pretty good shape. The stories that are contained within it are the premier story on here. The main one is Liners of Time by John Russell Fears. And then you also have The White City by David H. Keller, MD. Got a doctor writing a story. Older Than Methuselah by Koblenz. A Saga of Poesy and Nega by Joseph Skidmore. And The Gypsies of Toss by Frederick Hester. And these are always interesting. These are going to be very pulpy. This is the definition of pulp science fiction here from May 1935. But also interestingly, almost more interesting the stories are the adverts and the little type of editorials that appear in these magazines that really just are a time capsule of what was going through people's heads, of what their lifestyles were like back 90 years ago, almost a century ago, preserved here in this magazine. You got some advertisements on the back there. You've got a weight loss advertisement on the inside here, and those can be a lot of fun. So that's pick number 2, potential pick number 2 for week number 1 of Rocket Summer, Amazing Stories from May of 1935. And that gets us to week number 2. Week number 2, reading vintage science fiction from the 1940s. The first choice here is The Weapon Shops of Isher by A.E. Van Vogt. This will be a reread for me. I think this is 3 of his stories. I don't think that's anywhere near all of them. Let's see, how many we got stories in here? Okay, got it. There are 3 short stories in here by Van Vogt on the Weapon Shops line. And his Weapon Shop series, you have The Seesaw from 1941, The Weapon Shop from 1942, and The Weapon Shops of Isher from 1949. I have read all these before. I like them a lot. It's been a long time since I've read these. This is a bit of a controversial topic these days because it does deal with the Second Amendment. Outlaw Bookseller over on his fantastic channel, he recently reviewed The Weapon Shops of Isher and did a really nice, a very, very tactful review, a very diplomatic review, and a good review of The Weapon Shops of Isher. But this is a good potential one here. A.E. Van Vogt, when he's on, he's on. Sometimes he's off. He has some books that are a bit hit and miss, in my opinion, but these are some of his best stories, The Weapon Shops of Isher. So that's potential pick number 1 for week 2. Potential pick number 2 is Assignment in Eternity by Robert A. Heinlein. This is another short story collection here of short stories by the Dean of Science Fiction from the 1940s, and it has 4 short stories by Robert A. Heinlein. It has Gulf, Elsewhen, I really like that title, Lost Legacy, and Jerry Was a Man. And this is probably going to be inside of his known universe tales, I'm guessing, although it's a little early from 1949. I don't know if he's fully developed that idea at this point. But if I read this one, we'll find out. And that is Assignment in Eternity by Robert A. Heinlein. And my third pick for week 2 is another pulp. It is astounding science fiction from 1947, May of 1947, which has Fury by Lawrence O'Donnell, which is a pen name for Henry Kuttner, who was married to the author of Jarell of Jory, C.L. Moore. So that's going to be the title story in here. That's part 1 of a 3-part series, so it won't be the complete story of Fury, but it'll be part 1. So if you're going to start, that's the one to start with. In addition to that, it has Tiny and the Monsters by Theodore Sturgeon. Theodore Sturgeon, that's pretty good. E for Effort by T.E. Sherrod. And Jesting Pilot by Paget. And The Journey and the Goal by Chan Davis. And again, just a lot of times, what's more entertaining than the actual pulp fiction in here are the editorials and the advertisements. And these things can be highly entertaining. So that is potential pick number 3 there for week 2, which gets us to week number 3. Week number 3, which is stories from the 1950s. And this has got some really good ones, but I'm pretty sure I know which one of these 3 books over here for week 3 that I'm going to pick. First one is Mission of Gravity by Hal Clement, which is just a classic in science fiction. This is a great book. I've got to read this book at some point. I'm going to have to get to this one. Pick number 2 is another collection of short stories. It is 8 Phantasms and Magics by Jack Vance. Jack Vance is a phenomenal writer. Just can't miss with Jack Vance, and that's a collection of 8 of his short stories. Oh, I got 4 picks here. I lied. And then we also have Worlds Without End by Clifford D. Simak. Clifford D. Simak, one of my favorite science fiction writers. And how many stories is in Worlds Without End? You get 3 short stories in here. Worlds Without End, the eponymously titled story, The Spaceman's Van Gogh, and Full Cycle. So Clifford D. Simak. And then the final one, and this is probably almost certainly what I'm going to read here for week 3, which is the 1950s, is Philip K. Dick's Time Out of Joint from 1959. Now, Chris over at Liminal Spaces just very recently reviewed this book. It's one of the reasons why I got this book was because of his review, an excellent review, and I will link Chris's video down in the description below. I encourage you to go check that out. Philip K. Dick, who was definitely a new wave writer. So I don't know, I've never read this book before. I suspect that it will have new wave aspects to it, but it also might be a little pulpy as well. I'm in the middle of a Philip K. Dick project, of which this is going to be part, where I'm reading a large amount of Philip K. Dick. I've actually just finished 2 collections of his short stories that were very interesting, and I'm doing it because of because of this book right here, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which I read probably about 4 years ago, about 2 years before I started the channel here. And this is not a good book. This, in fact, is a pretty bad book. It's badly written. It's written on about the level of a high school student. That's the quality of the writing here in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And I had that in my head. I didn't like that book at all, as I've let you guys know. But then there's been a large number of booktubers here recently out on BookTube who've been doing videos on Philip K. Dick, just saying how much they love Philip K. Dick. And these are booktubers whose opinions I know and I trust. So I'm giving Philip K. Dick another shot. I've already gone through 2 of his collections of short stories, very interesting short stories from the 1950s. And now we're moving on to his book here, Time Out of Joint, which gets a lot of praise. Gets talked about very often as a good, great introduction point for Philip K. Dick. So I'm going to read this for the first time, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread at least a part of this, and then I'm going to do a full video on Philip K. Dick at some point here in the near future. But for week 3 of Rocket Summer, this is almost certainly going to be the read, unless I knock this out before then, and then I'll go over to one of the other books. So that's week 3, and that gets us down to the final week of Rocket Summer. And I've got 3 books picked over here. It could be any one of these 3 books. These are all great ones. It's going to be a very tough choice. So let's take a look and see what we got. We got H. Beam Piper, Space Viking. The title of this book sold me on it when I saw it in the bookstore. Space Vikings, Vikings in Space, sold. I gotta get this one. I don't care for that cover very much. This is a reprint, obviously, from the original story, which was in 1960. When was this written? 1960 what? So, okay, this was a serialization. These are stories that appeared originally in Analog Science Fact and Analog Magazine, a very famous science fiction magazine. I've got a few laying around here somewhere. And part 1 was published in November 1962, part 2 in December 1962, then in January 1963, and then the final part in February of 1963 with Space Viking. So that is a potential there by H. Beam Piper. Number 2 is another classic of science fiction, is The High Crusade by Paul Anderson, another classic of science fiction. This is a really good one. This gets a ton of praise. Tim over at Secret Fire Books recently reviewed this book. I'll link his description. I'll link his video down in the description below. Go check that out. That's an excellent video as well. But The High Crusade by Paul Anderson, very good science fiction from the 1960s. This is definitely vintage science fiction with a non-new wave bent to it. At least that's my understanding. I've not read that before. And then the last one is from one of my favorite science fiction writers, and it's Clifford D. Simak, The Goblin Reservation. This would be a reread for me. I read this decades ago. I remember loving this novel, thinking that this is one of Clifford D. Simak's best, but I can't remember a single thing about it. So I know this one has been making its rounds of the BookTube universe here recently, with a lot of people reading this book here, The Goblin Reservation, and I might have to read this one here myself here for the final week in July. I think, if I remember right, I think Michael K. Vaughan put this on his potential reading list as well. So I might want to not duplicate what he does, but this is one that at some point I'm definitely going to have to reread because I remember liking this a lot and not remembering an absolute thing about it. So that's it. Those are my picks, my selections for all 4 weeks of Rocket Summer. If one of those looks interesting to you, put it down in the comment section below. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up, and I'm going to say take care, be safe, and I will catch you guys next time.